the outdoors is a very hazardous place. You know, I think you owe it to yourself, your family and your mates, if you're doing anything outdoors, to learn something about first aid. And the guy literally died on the trip, and every person watching should be first aid trained. G'day and welcome back. Today I brought in a friend of mine, Gary Spokes from GJS. We'll start that again. G'day and welcome back. Today I've got a mate of mine with me, Gary from GJS Business Solutions and Training, and I brought Gary along today because I wanted to have a chat about first aid. Gary is a certified first aid instructor and very knowledgeable in the area of first aid. So say g'day, Gary.
How you going, everybody? So my background in first aid has basically been a lot of with voluntary organisations and law enforcement agencies. I started with St John when I was 8, and at the age of 18 I moved across the State Emergency Services of New South Wales, and then later on to other volunteer organisations, and I'm currently with the RFS. During that time I've been a first aid trainer with St John, with the SES, with the RFS. I've taught for TAFE New South Wales. I've also written first aid training and trained trainers for law enforcement agencies, as well as being a frontline person myself.
So you know a thing or two. You've had to actually apply first aid. You're not just someone who's read it in a book and can spew out the information. You've actually sort of been out in the field and frontline and had to apply that knowledge into a real life scenario. And I guess that's kind of what brought this video about, because I was talking to one of the fellas at my work. I work in an underground coal mine, and you can imagine in a coal mine sometimes stuff does happen, and I've had very good friends of mine, and a shout out to those, you know who you are, who have had life-changing injuries happen from accidents underground. And anybody who's involved in any outdoor activity, the outdoors is a very hazardous place. I mean, you've got everything. There's things that want to fall on you. There's things that want to bite you, sting you. There's things you can fall off of, or you know, there's just so many things in the outdoors that can do you damage. And I think first aid is quite often something that is in the back of people's minds, but it won't happen to me. Well, it might not happen to you. It might happen to somebody else, and then, you know, I think you owe it to yourself, your family and your mates, if you're doing anything outdoors, to learn something about first aid. And
that's exactly right. A lot of us go into first aid courses purely because our work, our employment makes us do it. And we go in with that mentality of, I'm just a passenger here because I have to do it. Where to me, first aid is that lifestyle skill. It's who in your life matters that you may need to do first aid on, be it your child, your husband, your wife, your partner, your best mate. And when you're a bit of a klutz like I am, often I've had to do first aid on myself.
Yeah, and I mean, like myself, you go out and you do a lot of solo stuff. So a lot of solo camping, I might go out in the boat on my own. And if something goes wrong, you're going to have to rely on yourself. So things like communication becomes important, carrying an EPIRB and that sort of thing, but also a good first aid kit. And I'm going to go over some first aid kits in a minute. But what brought this video about, I was having a conversation with a fellow at work, and he was telling me how, and you know who you are if you're watching, he shared a story with me, and I appreciate him sharing it. So he was out on a motorbike enduro ride with a couple of family members, an uncle and a few friends, and noticed that his uncle was starting to act a little bit funny, and didn't think too much of it. Just like, you know, what's going on, you old bastard, let's keep going sort of thing. And then the uncle started sort of talking in some gibberish and not acting himself. They knew something was up, but didn't really understand what was going on. Give it another hour down the track, and they're thinking, he's really not looking that good. We might have to turn around and go home, you know. But it was probably a 2-hour ride back to the car wherever they were or whatever. And the uncle's like, I've just got to sit down for a minute, and sat down underneath a tree, and the guy died. He was actually suffering from heat sickness and hypothermia. Didn't recognise the symptoms, and the guy literally died on the trip. So you can imagine the guilt that we felt throughout that group, having learnt what happened. Why didn't I recognise the signs and this and that? I think every Australian, every person watching should be first aid trained.
I think it should be part of your driver's licence.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, you shouldn't be allowed to have a driver's licence without having first aid knowledge. That's my personal opinion, but I don't think that'll ever go that way.
No, I'll go one further and say I think it should be taught in schools. But, you know, we can only do what we can do, and we can sort of spread the word as best we can and encourage everyone to get professional first aid training. Look, I'm going to be sharing quite a few first aid videos, and like I said, Gary's a certified first aid trainer. I'm not, so I can't really train people in first aid, but what I can do is share some scenarios that I've been faced with or heard of or whatever, and explain what I would do in those circumstances. And of course, any advice that I pass on, I'd be running past someone like Gary before posting any information, because I think it's important to give good information. And because, you know, we were talking on the way down, first aid training changes every year. Every 3 years I go for training, there's something different going on. Well, you know, everybody's learning as we go, different technology, different research and so forth. Gary was saying that it's a good thing that it changes, but you need to keep up to date with those changes. So what I may think is the correct thing to do may have changed since the making of the video even. So I encourage you to do your own first aid training. Carrying a good first aid kit is all well and good having the knowledge on what to do, and you can have improvised first aid kits. One of the pieces of kits I carry with me is just a bright orange bit of cloth. It's 1 metre by 1 metre. It's made out of cotton, and it's got I don't know, a dozen odd different uses, and I'll do another video on some of the uses for the bright orange cloth. But being 1 metre by 1 metre, I can fold it into a triangular bandage, and the way I keep it stored in my pocket, it's even just a broad bandage. So if I needed to stop a bleed by applying pressure, it's a bit of kit that I have with me to be able to improvise a first aid item. If I needed to apply pressure to a wound, I can do that. It's handy for a whole other array of things as well. But even just a cheap triangular bandage that comes in your first aid kit, it fits in your pocket, doesn't take up much room. My good friends at Survival First Aid, they aren't sponsoring the video in any way, but they did send me out a couple of first aid kits when I said that I wanted to do some first aid. Little praying mantis. So they sent me out some first aid kits to sort of show some of their products and what they're about. And I've got one for the boat, and I've got one for the car. Now I've had the car first aid kit for, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 years. And that's why I reached out to Survival when I said I was going to be doing some first aid videos, and they've sent me out a couple of things. Then I was also tossing up whether to get the snake bite kit, because in the area where we live here in Sydney area, you know, we have brown snakes, red belly, black snakes, there's death adders, there's copperheads, tiger snakes. We've got the whole array. Out of the top 10 venomous snakes in the world, there's probably 8 of them right behind me now, you know what I mean?
And then throw a few funnel webs in there just for good measure.
Funnel web spiders in the Sydney area too. So same first aid for funnel webs as there is for snake bite. Redbacks are different, that's for another time. But so instead of getting just a snake bite kit though, I've got the remote outdoor module, which goes with your car first aid kit, but I've stacked this with a heap of goodies so that it fits in it can fit on my belt, it can fit in my my small day pack, my larger pack on the outside, whatever. But that has information for bites and stings. It has the snake bite bandages. It also has some hydrogel things for burns. Another common outdoor thing. I mean, if we're lighting fires and cooking and things in the outdoors, burns are very common as well. So very sturdy first aid kits, good canvas out exterior. But what sets them apart from me from a lot of other first aid kits, and if you've seen these before, you'll know what I'm about to say, is that, I might even get a close-up of that, is that everything inside is labelled and in different colours. And there's enough room in here to add personal medications, such as if you need to have some aspirins and that sort of stuff in there. Kids with allergies, you might be able to fit your antihistamines. That's what I was looking for. Well, I'm not a chemist, mate. I'm a simple man. But in my car kit as well, I even keep a tourniquet and some other bits and pieces, and a SAM splint. If you don't know what that is, it's basically just a moldable splint that you can use for immobilizing limbs and so forth. But very, very good first aid kits. Like I said, I've carried them for years, and I've got a link now in my link tree in the description. Just go through the link and it'll take you to Survival First Aid. You can have a look through their different packs and things that they've got.
It really is common sense. So if you've got a little bit of kit with you, And that's where the survival first aid kits are so great. Is it does give you that little bit of kit just to do the basics while you're calling for help.
Well, one of the other things, Gary, I noticed is that it comes with a little first aid booklet.
Yeah,
Now,
nice.
even if someone has done a first aid course through work, 3 years in between first aid training, if you're not familiar with it, what you're doing, you're going to forget stuff. So at least if you've got a reference guide, I guess it sounds simple for someone like you and I who've done a lot of first aid. If there's a bleed, stop the bleeding. A lot of people are going to turn to water, I guess, if there's lots and lots of blood. But the key, of course, to stopping a bleed is to apply pressure. Like I said before, like you could pinch the wound shut. If you've ever cut yourself, they say you never cut yourself with a sharp knife. I don't have anything but sharp knives, so I'm always cutting myself with
There's
sharp
two
knives.
types of sharp. There's normal person sharp, and then there's John Sharp.
So you only got to graze past one of these things and it's going to open you up. But if you've opened yourself up before, you're going to know that your natural response is if you cut yourself, you're going to apply pressure to it. So it sounds simple, okay, if it's bleeding, stop bleeding. But some people are going to go, wow, what do I do? Do I run away and get help or whatever?
And that's where quality training really does come into it. There's four reactions to fear, panic, and that's your fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. The more training you have, the more you're going to be able to control those emotions and actually revert back to your training, your DRS, ABCD, action plans, and really rely on those levels of training to get through an emergency or an incident.
What's the advantages of, or when should people look at doing a more advanced first aid kit or advanced first aid course or remote first aid? Like there's lots of different tiers of first aid level, and obviously everybody starts at the basic first aid and doing CPR. Where do people go after that? So
in my opinion, provide first aid, which is what a lot of people call basic first aid or senior first aid in many years gone by, is a great place to start to get your foundations and your basics right. But if you're like John or myself and you do venture into the outdoors, I do recommend doing a remote area first aid course. Provide first aid is going to teach you the basics for urban Sydney or wherever you're from. We expect an ambulance to be there within 10 to 15 minutes. We're not going to be doing any extended patient care. We're not going to necessarily be transporting and moving a patient. And those are skills that you'll really work on in your remote area first aid course, be it, fashioning stretchers out of what you can get access to and what bits of kit you're carrying, to extended patient care, really making sure that you're setting up shelters and getting things underneath to protect from environmental factors, how to splint a potential break to a point where it won't move during transport or to seriously reduce the likelihood of it moving during transport. And all those skills are very different from your provide first aid, urban Sydney courses. So the moment you start going to remote environments or bushwalking or
what would you
mountain
call
biking,
a remote environment though? Because a lot of people think a remote environment is you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, or you might be out in the ocean somewhere. But what would you say is a remote environment where you would sort of benefit from a remote first aid course?
Distance isn't the definition of remote. You could simply be on the other side of a river, and if people can't get to you, then you're remote. You're still going to have to look after that person for longer until emergency services get to you. It could be in the bush, it could be across a river, it could be down a mine, if you're a miner, because the services that we rely on don't have immediate access to you. So technically you're remote, you're cut off or isolated. And that's where that advanced training will really come into play and help you through that incident.
Here in the town that we're in, there's one road in, one road out, and there could be a bushfire that's blocking that road, and now you're remote without even realising that that situation could occur. So you don't know what sort of is going to come about. I will add though that remote first aid and advanced first aid, it's worth every cent that you pay for, but they are quite expensive. So in saying that, and I'm not taking anything away from certified trainers and doing a certified course, but you can still learn the skills that are involved in remote first aid without being certified, and perhaps being a workplace first aider or something like that. But you can still learn the skills. It's just then up to you and your responsibility to keep that training up to date. Just something as simple as being able to tie a square knot. You know, you're going to need to tie a square knot for a sling, for immobilizing limbs. Maybe you do have to fashion yourself a stretcher. Learning your knots and lashings seems like a fairly basic skill, but it's one of those skills that are lost to a lot of people, being able to improvise things as well. So it's not even just the first aid skills. There's a lot of outdoor skills that can be utilised within first aid, such as knot tying. So knots and lashings are really important when you don't have the nice ratchet straps and those things available to you.
Whatever that is in the bush, I don't really want to know about, to be honest. Because it's not human.
No, there's a couple of yowies floating around here, I think. I did have a deer honk at me the other day from just over the other side of the creek, and it scared the crap out of me. It was a lot louder. I thought, that's a really loud goose. And then it did it again. And I thought, no, it's not. And then I saw the white tail disappear off into the distance through the bushes. What have you got in your pack there, Gary, as far as first aid equipment?
My backpack always carries my first aid kit, a personal locator beacon, a multi-tool. So the 2 pouches on the front of my bag, one of them set up for snake bite and venomation, and the other one's set up for trauma. So one of the pieces of equipment that I always carry with me is my tourniquet.
What sort of things would you use a tourniquet for? Because it's a fairly specific tool.
Even Provide First Aid, we're teaching the use of tourniquets and wound packing all the way down to basic first aid, because controlling of bleeding is so important.
There is the 4Bs, and you raised the point when we were chatting the other day about the 4Bs, how, and like I said, first aid changes all the time. One of the changes that Gary brought about is a very valid point. And what was that about the 4Bs that we spoke about?
So the 4Bs that we've always taught as a triaging system is breathing, bleeding, burns and breaks. Breathing being paramount, bleeding coming second. We're getting to the stage now where we've realised that we train breathing, bleeding, burns and breaks so regularly that people will always follow that. Sometimes, however, there's exceptions to the rules. If somebody's got a life-threatening bleed, you probably need to deal with that bleed before you start worrying about airways and CPR and all the other parts that come around the breathing component, because if they're bleeding out, they've only got a short period of time. And
you pumping the heart is actually speeding that process up.
Yep. So, and we're not talking about a trickle of blood. We're talking about life-threatening torrential hemorrhage or serious severe bleeding.
Yeah, which is where you would use the tourniquet.
Is where you would use a tourniquet. Yep. So other than the tourniquet, I carry a couple of roller bandages, triangulars. Now, I honestly don't know if this is an Elias or an Oleus. I don't know the pronunciation. I'm going to call it an Elias modular bandage. I always carry an Elias.
So they're a variation of the Israeli bandage. If people are familiar with an Israeli bandage, where it applies direct pressure to the wound, and it has mechanical advantage built into it.
And what I like about the Elias over the standard Israeli is it is modular, so the padding can be pulled out and used for wound packing. It comes with a piece of plastic that you can use for a pneumothorax, or sorry, an open sucking wound to the chest. So there's all these different components, and I think improvements on the original Israeli bandage. So this one here is I can use this for the splinting wound care, because it's got the triangulars, the roller bandages. This side over here is predominantly envenomation, so I carry a couple of snake bite bandages, a couple of other bandages for use, and numerous sets of gloves.
Just quickly on the snake bite bandages, the snake bite bandage, I don't have an open one with me. I should have probably brought one along. But the way that they're designed is they have a rectangle on it, and when you've stretched the elastic till that rectangle forms a square, then you've got the right amount of pressure to wrap for a snake bite. A lot of people think that what we're doing when we're applying this bandage is we're stopping or slowing down the blood flow. That's not really the case in the event of a snake bite, because it doesn't actually travel through your blood system, it travels through your lymphatic system. But what it does is slow down the movement of that lymphatic system before it gets to your blood system. So immobilization is key. In my little pouch though, those snake bite bandages are quite on the bulky side. So I just carry an elastic. So that's your snake bite bandage, and that's a normal elastic bandage. So you can tell from that the different sizes of those two bandages. So in a small kit like the one that I'm carrying on my belt, where room is absolute paramount, I'm only going to be carrying the absolute minimum. So if you didn't have a snakebite bandage on hand, the general rule is you apply a pressure bandage the same as what you would for a sprained ankle or a twisted knee or something like that. So we don't want to cut the circulation off. You want to leave the toes or fingers exposed so that you can check to make sure that there's still blood flow getting through. We don't want to stop the blood flow. Okay, so first aid wise, that's what you've got in there. The other thing that Gary has on him, though, that a lot of people don't think is a first aid item, is fresh water. So today I think we're teetering on in the early 30s degrees Celsius, but here in Australia anyway, I mean, we can get well into the 40s, very, very hot. And as I shared earlier, a friend of ours had a relative die from hypothermia, because regulating body temperature and staying hydrated is so important in the summer months. I carry a water filter. I've got it tied on because I don't want to lose it. I've made a little lanyard for it, but I carry a water filter. I do have another video or two on water filtration. This is the Sawyer Mini. Sawyer Squeeze Mini. The beautiful thing about these are they come with a squeeze bag, but you can also use discarded water bottles or Coke bottles and that sort of stuff. They screw straight onto the lid, and then you can squeeze it and clean water comes out the other side. Alternatively, there's a straw that comes with it, and you can drink water straight out of a water source. They will get rid of 99% of all pathogens. However, they don't get rid of chemicals. So if there's, fuel spill or something in the water, or any sort of chemical issues within the water, then it's not going to get rid of those. You drink when you're thirsty. We don't want to be rationing our water supply. Drink when you're thirsty. Obviously, if you're peeing clear and often, then you've probably had sort of more water than what you need. So be mindful of consuming your water, but don't save it. If you need it, drink it. And at the other end of the scale, hypothermia, we have a fire kit and able to build a fire.
Yeah, the funny part, John, most people don't consider hypothermia in the Sydney region.
No.
Because we've been teaching about, when you fall into icy cold waters.
Yeah.
Hypothermia is a lot more than that. Sort of, even on a good night in Sydney, the grounds will still get down to quite a cool temperature. And if you're treating somebody, or somebody's gone into shock or has an injury, and you lay them directly on the floor, that body heat's just going to be dissipating straight into that ground.
Yep.
So even in the confines or the heart of Sydney, hypothermia or environmental factors really need to be taken into consideration.
Yep, absolutely. And wearing something on your head in colder environments, we lose a lot of heat from our head. I've always got a hat on, and as does Gary, but things like beanies and things to keep your head warm. And there's another use for your cotton bandage. You can make a bandana out of it to try and contain some of that heat, to stop heat loss through the top of your head as well, and insulating, as Gary said, before you lay down. So regulating body temperature, there's another important first aid skill to make yourself aware of, and learn the signs and symptoms of both hyper and hypothermia. Well, I think there's probably a lot for people to absorb in one sitting, so we might leave it there. But
can I just add one thing?
Sure.
The most important thing you can do before you venture into the great outdoors is tell somebody where you're going.
100%.
Where you're going, the areas you're likely to be exploring, and when you're expected home. Just sit down and wait.
Yep.
Because eventually they're going to come look for you.
But quite often the decisions you make before you go out are going to, lessen the extent of the emergency in a lot of cases. Like you said, tell someone where you're going, when you're going to be back, carrying something like an EPIRB or something in your pack. Look, I'm fairly new into the YouTube thing. I think we've been going about 12 months now, and I've sort of started getting a little bit more confident behind it in front of the camera. It's not something that I've been comfortable with. But I'm passionate about what it is that we're doing, and I think everybody needs to know these skills when you're venturing into an outdoor environment. I don't know everything, but what I don't know, I'll know someone who does know, and I'll bring them in to have a chat about it. So thanks very much, Gary.
No worries.
Wealth of knowledge, and thanks for your input. I'm trying to talk Gary into starting a YouTube channel, first aid specific. He, like myself, not overly confident in front of a camera, so I dragged him out today.
Second time today. First time with John. And that one, yeah, it was pretty tragic.
Which one was that? Was that the water filter?
Yeah, I think it was the water filter, and I think that you could just drunk my shirt. I was just perspiring so hard that day.
That's right. I think I may have made a note that you were sweating harder than a millionaire at tax time.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah,
which is the nicest thing he's ever said, by the way.
So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks,
and,
John.
Thanks for watching through. If you've watched through to the end, I appreciate it. Look, help the channel out. Give us a like and a subscribe. I think there's going to be lots of good things coming over the next 12 months and hopefully beyond. And fingers crossed that that we're able to sort of help someone through a situation that may have been a dire situation. So thanks again for watching, and see you on the next one.